Well, first of all, I'd like to thank you all very much for inviting me to the steering committee. I look forward to working on it. Mr. Garg, Mrs. Sundarajan, Mr. Agarwal, Mr. Umashankar, Mr. Pathak, ladies and gentlemen, you know, in all the talk we do of innovation, we tend to forget that actually barely 350 years ago, we were one of the most innovative countries in the world, and we accounted for 25% of global GDP, about the same as China, about the same as all of Europe. Then came colonization and our own adoption of a socialist approach to growth, and we more or less killed entrepreneurship and went virtually bankrupt in 1991. So when we globalized, all of us, industry and government, were scared that all of our industries and companies would get taken over by global players. We now know that is not the case because our old DNA surfaced. We have acquired twice as many companies as have acquired Indian companies. Our growth rate went to double digits. We are a different player today. From nothing, in 25 years, we built one of the world's best and leading software industries, 50 million to 150 billion in barely 25 years. And the other innovation is in the area that we are all part of, is in telecom. And who would have thought 2 decades ago, when you had a waiting list for years to get a phone connection, that we would have 1 billion people connected? That's a result of innovation on the part of government and then different private players who came to do it. So today the situation is very different. When we created TCOE, and it was a great idea to do it at that time, but the model, of course, was based on what existed at that time. So if you look at it today, we are amongst the top 4 startup hubs in the world. There's us, there's China, there's Israel, there's the United States. The US is far ahead, but the other 3 are very close together. In fact, in the first quarter of this year, we had 50% more startups than China did in the technology space. They raised 2.5 times as much money as startups in the UK did, which is one of the other hubs. There are 68 unicorns globally, and unicorns are meant to be unlisted companies that are valued at $1 billion or more. 10 of them in the internet space are now in India. Our internet user base now is about 240 odd billion. The US is about 270, and China is 641. But we are growing at 14%, the US is growing at 7%, and China is growing at 4%. What that means is within the next 2 years, we will actually become the second largest internet base. 80% or more of our internet users actually are on the mobile, which makes it a very unique situation globally. And if you look at the growth in our phones, then the biggest growth is in the smartphone segment. So different research reports say that we will have about 650 million smartphones by 2019, which is just 3 or 4 years hence. 50% of our mobile users are on social media, which means today we're the second largest user of Facebook. In 2 years, we will be ahead of the US. We'll be the #1 user of Facebook. The other thing that has also changed is if you go back 2 decades, we had almost no funding for startups, almost no venture capital in India. So when I first was chairing the Indian Venture Capital Association, we had $200 million that came in. That number has been now going between 15 and $20 billion. If you look at absolute startup funding, then the best example we have is of another organization that that I had co-founded called the Indian Angel Network. Hemant Kanakia sitting there is part of that network and on our board. Just 7 years ago when we started it, we used to see 200 startups coming to us. We used to fund 1 or 2. Today, we see 4,000 startups every year, and we fund close to 35, 40 startups. It makes us the largest angel group in the world. by far, by the number of members, 350 people who invest, by the number of startups that we see, by the number of startups we invest, by the amount of dollars that we invest. That tells us all what is beginning to happen in India. The scene is completely changing, and that is why I think it is so welcome, and I really congratulate all the people on the dais for taking the step of saying, how should we reinvent TCOE in a changed scenario, in a changed circumstance? There are different models around the world we can look at, but a lot of things that I was hearing today from Mr. Garg, from Mr. Agarwal, Mr. Sundarajan, Mr. Umashankar, were very welcome. It's about saying that we will look at what's happening. We will see what role we can play, and we'll evolve the best way forward. Because TCOE has a very special place. On the one hand, it is part of government, so it has the ability to influence policies, it has the ability to give inputs and feedback. It is connected with the telecom sector, telecom industry. It is in a space, this whole piece that we have today of the internet and mobile, the reason why it's very important is that if we look at most of our needs, which are in healthcare, affordable healthcare, delivery, access, diagnostics, if we look at education, if we look at inclusiveness on the finance, all of these are driven by the intersection of IT, telecom, mobile, internet. And that is why it's very encouraging that we are becoming a leader in this space in the world, at the same time that we have world-class entrepreneurs coming out of the woodwork, and there is access to different levels of financing. So these are the ingredients you need for innovation to start to happen, and we're beginning to see some of that happen. And TCOE can play a great role because it's sitting at that intersection. But because the circumstances have changed, I think as we go along, we need to keep looking at how we can play a role which doesn't duplicate what anybody else is doing, but which actually creates a platform where the different pieces can come and connect. And we're doing things which the other players in the ecosystem cannot actually do. So the government connection is key. It does that. Israel has used a model where you pick areas, you select ideas that need more work to be done, R&D to be done. And the government is willing to fund some of that, very little. But it's basically willing to fund some of that going forward only if that idea can get private sector funding as well, which becomes a measure of saying, is this something that actually has business validity? Is this something that can scale? Is this something that can be made sustainable? And the model has worked exceedingly well because over time, the government contribution to this is less than 5%. 95% of all the capital for the growth of all this innovation actually comes from the private sector. So they have a nice tiered approach. I mean, they call it the Office of the Chief Scientist in different ways. At TCOE, we can develop our own models, look at what our strengths are, what our connectivity is, I mean, as they say, the greatest enemy of the good is the better. So you keep waiting for the best thing and you don't do anything. The best way for us is to have a model and start, but be open to saying, is there a better way for us to get other players such as academia, industry, angels, venture capital, government, telecom players connect. So we could actually create a very, very unique place for ourselves. And I'm very encouraged by the discussions I've had here on my last visit, on everything I've heard today. So I am really looking forward to being able to contribute in this effort. Thank you very much.